Customer proof is gold. And I think companies that will win in 2024 are the ones that will leverage their customers to sell on their behalf.
Set the stage for me. Mid last year, you were ready to kind of shake things up when it comes to how you all do customer proof and customer marketing. Why was leading with customer proof so important for you all?
Yeah, it's because I come from a CSM background and I know the power of connecting customers to prospects so they can have that realistic preview of what it's like to work with Gainsight. And I know that there are so many asks that come to CSMs, reference requests, EBRs, getting people to events, all those types of things where it can be on the back burner. So what we needed to do was figure out where all of our advocates are so we can start converting them, understanding who our advocates are, who has the best use cases, and how we can leverage them customer to customer or customer to prospect. And we all have this mental Rolodex of our best advocates in our heads, but we can't operationalize any of that if it's not recorded anywhere.
When we first dove in, what was the state of affairs? Like, I remember we had content in a few forms. You had a lot of happy customers and data to show it, but it was pretty hard to wrangle.
Yeah, we were living out of Google Sheets in a lot of different areas, advocates and the company bands and the use cases that they were a part of. We had a lot of content that was a little bit dry and didn't use a lot of ROI metrics to lead with. So it was aspirational versus having hard ROI around things like gross retention, net retention, efficiency, and productivity. So that's what the field was craving, is that hard ROI where they can talk to a prospect and say, hey, here's a realistic preview of the benefits you can get by working with Gainsight.
This is a pretty systemic, consistent problem for a lot of organizations, but why is that hard?
It's tough to get that in the first place. It's tough to figure out who's getting the most value from your product or service at scale. So what we'd previously do is we'd have to rely on asking CSMs and asking around. We would just rely on anecdotal proof and not real hard metrics. So we would have to have a less than desirable kind of use case that isn't driven by the ROI. And just like many companies, there's been a number of individuals owning this over the years. So there's been a lot of things passed on from honestly 5-6 years ago where there were different formats, whether it's a sales deck or a customer story, case study, testimonial video, styles have changed. So it's really tough to make sure that content life cycle is being kept up to date and consistent. So that's what we were really craving, is one, just trying to find these customers at scale who are getting value, and two, be able to have a standardized way that's impactful to get this content out into the wild, into customers and prospects' hands, but also to be leveraged in sales cycles from our AEs too.
You were a CSM. Did you find any tricks for getting customers to share metrics?
Yeah, you have to know their business and know what workflows and things they've been working on. And as a CSM, I always said there needs to be some degree of bi-directional accountability. So when I would get a customer, I basically a social contract of, well, here's what I'm going to do for you and here's what you're going to do for me. We're going to be very laser focused on these workflows and strategies. And when we do business reviews, these are the metrics that I want you to come to me with. And I'll give you some helpful tips on how to measure that. At the crux of it, have that culture of ROI first and our measurement. If you don't measure, you're not really sure what you're actually doing. You could just doing a process for the sake of doing a process. So it takes a good CSM, number one, to be able to get that. But then number two, it takes a really good customer to be able to make those correlations and to be able to measure the efficacies of the processes that you're implementing. Gainsight is a tool where you can customize it to the point where it can become useless, just like a Salesforce and just like a lot of other tools. So it's really important to make sure you're starting with those small use cases and you're constantly measuring them.
Gainsight has this concept of a business outcome that your CSMs are responsible for tracking. A lot of organizations either don't do it or don't do it consistently, and it makes QBR, EBR time really tough because you're trying to say, what has this customer achieved? It's like hand wavy type metrics. So did Gainsight always have that?
I had joined as a CSM back in 2018, and that's when we were first launching verified outcomes. So what we were doing was we'd use Gainsight and we'd success plans, and we'd track the objectives that the customer is trying to achieve, and we'd manage to them. It was so important that our bonus, our OTE, was dependent on that being captured. So if in the beginning it started off not only quantitative, but also qualitative. So it was a slow roll. But now we're at the point where they have to be quantitative. So it has to be impacts to GRR, NRR, or customer acquisition costs, or NPS, or productivity efficiency. That's a gold mine for customer proof points and customer marketing.
Anything new that you introduce to a customer takes a little while to get accustomed to, or even organizationally. I think of OKRs and how long it takes you to really figure out how to do them well as an organization. Was that the case with verified business outcomes?
Definitely. That was the hard part when I was a CSM, is extracting those numbers from them, because some people aren't always keen to share, or some people don't know. The biggest risk that I would see is when I'm talking to an executive or a director level individual and they don't know those metrics. So immediately I think this customer's at risk, or they're not really doing customer success the way they should be. So there were customers like that, but there was
Not
ways
naming any names.
No, I would never. But the ones that would share are the ones that would be the most open, but also be the most beneficial from working with Gainsight and their CS program, because they have benchmarks. They join Gainsight, here's your benchmark NPS, here's your account ratios for CSMs. Great. We know all of that. We know your retention numbers, your GRR, NRR. Now let's build these workflows and build these correlative models. So when you have that in place, then 6 months later and you go back and you do a QBR and you're gathering the data, it's really compelling. And it's just as compelling to see what's moving the needle positively as what's moving the needle negatively. So those were the customers I loved working with, because they knew the charter of their team and they knew the metrics they needed to move.
Let's talk about the usage of those as customer proof. When we first dug into the data, you have so many verified business outcomes coming through logged by your CSMs, but that data didn't live nicely on a shelf. So talk to me about the state of that data and the other customer proof signal data.
I saw it when I was a CSM, this customer proof data from verified outcomes, and thinking, these are the people who should be on webinars, who should be speaking on stage at our events. A verified outcome, it's a business objective that has been achieved by the customer and attributed to the products and services of Gainsight. That's the definition of customer proof. So why not take that a little bit further? So when we open this fire hose up, as you can see here, there's a list of tons of different things that we can use them for. And when I talk about things like NPS scores, directionally, I don't think they're very impactful, but it's real what you do in the moment when you get that NPS score. You should really focus on your promoters, because we've said this before, and you say it, the escalation of commitment in advocacy. When someone is giving you a great score, or when someone is realizing value, they're more likely to do these other types of things for you as well. So they're more likely to join your advocacy program, be involved with reference requests, give you feedback on product enhancements and improvements, leave a G2 review. There's just so much untapped potential. And that's what I was saying when I originally pitched like this whole advocacy team that I took over, is we're only hitting the tip of the iceberg. Look at all this great stuff here. Let's operationalize so much of this, and let's put this in customer proof, third-party review sites. And we've seen just such huge wins from it in 3 to 6 short months.
Let's untangle some of these sources of customer proof. You have new verified business outcomes, 9 or 10 NPS responses, and we're flowing those through into a single channel along with what customers are saying in Gong through Laudable. You then have these candidates of stories that you can prioritize in one of these 3 tracks.
Yeah, that's the escalation of commitment. We've elected the fire emojis to represent the level of commitment. This has been great for us because we could try to package all of that up in one and say, hey, can you be a webinar guest, G2 review, do a sales slide, and join our advocacy program? And when you make that bulk ask up front, they're more likely to say yes than over time.
This is one people really struggle with, and they end up having different teams across the organization, making different asks at different times.
The escalation of commitment is really about bundling an ask at the time that a customer is most likely to say yes. Think about all the asks you might have for a customer in a year. You might ask them for several reference requests, to be on a webinar or two, to do a case study, and they might be from different people too. So it's like you have to reintroduce yourself. I'm Tim from marketing. I'm Scott from sales. I'm Angela from the customer success team. It's so fragmented. So when you escalate the commitment and you make that bulk ask up front, it makes it so much easier for them to say yes. Part of it too is to prime them with how you can help them do some of these things too. For example, with G2 reviews, having Laudable help us draft a G2 review on their behalf and say, hey, we understand the value you're getting. We'd love to hear your story through a number of different mediums. The webinar or this G2 review that I pre-drafted, are any or all of these interesting to you? How can we help you or help us help you? Like that ask goes over so well. And that's what we do now at Gainsight.
There's a principle, don't make them think. So this idea of taking something they already said, whether it was to a CSM in a gong call, and repackaging that as a draft or an outline of a G2 review, and then making the ask to them consolidated with other asks with a silver platter of a G2 review that you can pluck and make your own, edit, add to, or just post.
Yeah, and we're in the AI age where we're listening to everything and we're able to synthesize so much of this. We shouldn't be asking a customer, hey, let's get on a call and we'll interview you about your use case. I've been talking about my use case for 3 years at Gainsight. I know you're listening to all my calls. Tell me what my use case is and I'll edit it for you. And it's just great because it helps both parties, right? It helps get the brand recognition for that company. It shows how well they're doing in that department, which in essence should attract more customers to them because it's, wow, this CS team at, XYZ company is doing extremely well. It could make sense to work with them. And it obviously boosts your own brand too.
It's still a delight moment for me when we go to try to create a draft mini case study or a G2 review or a summary of sort of a customer's successes over time, and are able to do that, obviously plug in Laudable, but be able to do that with the call history from that company and from that user. Starting from zero with no context is like when you call up Comcast and they forward you to 19 different people to tell your problem over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, it just saves so much time. One of the things we struggled with here was just the length of time it takes to actually publish a case study. So there's a lot of different things that were going into it, right? Like the identification of the customer was one of the biggest parts, working with CSM specifically to figure out who's a good match. Then you have to schedule the call to talk through the use case. And that could be a half-hour long call, a lot of annoying questions that someone's probably answered a million times in gong calls. And then it's you send the draft over and you're redlining a ton of different things and you're back and forth probably over 2 or 3 weeks or more. And then you finally get to the last part, which is you get the sign off and then you have to get approval from their PR or their marketing department. And this could be 6 months later and then the department says, no, we can't do that, sorry.
Yeah.
And then you've wasted so much back and forth. And this process, you get that first draft immediately. And instead of even having a call, hey, so-and-so customer, we'd love to share your story. Here's what we pre-drafted. Would it make sense to connect, or you can actually redline it directly in this document?
I think every marketer who's ever done a case study has had this experience where it's just you're pulling your hair out because you poured so much effort, time, resources into this story, and then last minute rug pulled out from under you.
I mean, efficiency and productivity is just so helpful here.
My least favorite part of that was always that last minute trying not to be passive aggressive with the emails, and you're like, we're gonna post this live next Thursday if we don't hear from you. Yeah. I'm assuming everything's good. I know you're so busy.
Yeah, the ultimatum, those don't always work too well.
Let's go back to what you were saying about what's in it for the customer. A lot of times we feel really guilty asking them to do another reference call or leaving another G2 review after 6 months. But you and I talked to some customers who were used frequently as references, and they all saw a benefit to them.
The first level is networking, right? So for reference requests, you're networking with peers who are probably in the exact type of role that you're in, who are trying to accomplish the exact same things you're trying to accomplish. So there's always a learning opportunity there. And I think the advocates who engage in reference requests love the networking aspect of it. I think one of the biggest ones when it comes to customer proof, social proof, is up-leveling your personal brand. I think that's the number one thing, because when you get on a webinar with a company that is renowned in the space and they're well-respected, your face is on a card on LinkedIn and it says, join this webinar. Their company LinkedIn posts that, or their CEO reposts it, a number of individuals, and then that company reposts it. Like, you're getting so much brand recognition from it. And I've worked with so many folks over the past several years, and they've all come back to me and said, having me on that webinar series actually helped me secure funding for more customer success, or it helped me get recognized by the CEO and the work that we're doing in CS, or it helped me with this promotion because we're showing to the world. They're looking for avenues to tell their story. I think that is the biggest thing. What people get wrong so much in advocacy is just relying on cheap gifting. There's a time and a place for cheap gifting and sending a t-shirt. That's perfectly fine, but up-leveling personal brand and leaning into experiences. That's something we're working on now with our customer recognition program.
That was one of the things that struck me when we first started looking at the customer proof content that you all were doing. You had this bright light of really valuable content that you were sharing with your existing Gainsight community, but that we realized was incredibly valuable for prospects as well. And that was your customer spotlight webinar series, where people would get in screen sharing demos of how they built certain instances or how they built out their journey orchestrator sequences, very detailed, at the same time connecting it to top level strategic goals. Such a genius way to flip the case study on its head and not just have the traditional problem solution results format, but really get into the things that customers are actively figuring out.
Yeah, that was the biggest thing that I realized when I took over the advocacy program. Is there was a colleague on my team who was running this thing called the Spotlight series through our community that was 99% for our customers. I watched one and I realized this is gold. This is exactly what we're looking for. It's a customer getting on, talking about the hard ROI metrics that they've been able to achieve through Gainsight and showing the strategy. They're showing their instance of Gainsight, screen, like you're saying, screen sharing. When I saw that, I was like, we need to get this in our regular demand gen motions and start getting this in the hands of our prospects. And I remember the first time I posted one of our reps commented on it and was like, is there more of this coming? Like, can I get a recording? When you get reps asking for more marketing content, I think you're doing something right.
Part of the reason why that customer proof content is so versatile for prospects or customers is because you all are a platform company, right? There's always more functionality. You have a large, wide sweeping product that does a lot. And so customers are always in that education journey, learning how to do more things, learning how to up-level their CS org.
Yeah, a lot of different use cases. And now we're a 4-product company. So showing the other products to even customers that have Gainsight CS, our flagship product. They might want to see what customer education and customer communities and product experience look like. So it's a great cross-sell motion, whether it's greenfield and they're just interested in Gainsight customer education, or someone who's had Gainsight for 6 years and they're looking at their next product. They're so useful.
Tell me about repurposing from these webinars, because the other thing we saw, sales was asking for more of that content. It was a webinar and it lived in community, but there are so many more applications and so many iterations that we could plaster in different channels to bring value.
Yeah, one thing that we were definitely guilty of at Gainsight is just too much volume without enough socialization when it comes to content. I'm a big believer of content lifecycle management, getting as much as you can out of a single piece of content. Someone might just want to see a viral TikTok type video. Someone might want to see the long form of it. Or, in my opinion, you should be able to access all of it wherever you are. In the screen here, you're seeing the asset bundle. So we had done this was one of our Spotlight series videos, webinars, and we had posted it in community. The great thing is we were able to use Laudable to create what we were calling a customer recipe, using AI to create a customer story in the form of a short blog article. It mimicked a recipe because it showed a little bit of problem solution results and step by step. And then also a viral short video, a minute or less, on our social media or on LinkedIn. We'd also add a link directly to the full webinar if they wanted to see all of it. Same thing in the customer recipe. We'd link back to a short video and we'd link back the entire thing. But what's really cool, and what I was alluding to before with that escalation of commitment, is after this webinar, I had followed up with Melissa here with that draft G2 review that was auto-generated by Laudable. And the next day, she posted the exact same thing on there because it was so accurate. It showed exactly the ROI she was receiving, the use cases, the history, everything. And then obviously internally here, the customer win slide. Sales reps always just want a list of whatever they can access of use cases. Being able to have these at our disposal with problem solution results, quotes, is great. It's just a great reference to have on hand, an advocate in our back pocket when we need her. And it's great because we're helping her up-level that personal brand as well. Melissa's been a great advocate for us and actually helped us out with our customer recognition program, which we were talking about too.
Amazing. I was going to say, Melissa gave us lots of good feedback on this whole program. So thank you, Melissa. Let's talk through how you use this stuff for sales. And I'd love to start with what most people do. I have a customer, let me send a relevant case study. I'll find a case study of a company that's maybe the same size and industry. And then they just lob that case study over and they're done. what's better is give them the relevant proof points at a more granular level around what they need to hear. And then, of course, offer to connect them with people from a networking perspective in a reference call. So talk to me a little bit about what Gainsight has been doing when it comes to references.
We've been able to shift the culture towards a culture of advocacy so much at Gainsight to be able to always think about, is this person an advocate? How can we help them? How can they help us? Creating that culture is huge. Before, reference requests was probably the biggest thing that the advocacy team was handling. So you'd be a week or two out at the end of the quarter, rep would come in, we have a request form that they'd fill out and add some information in, and then we'd have to sift through a ton of different things to try to get the closest match. What we're getting to now is a lot more of a proactive approach. So what we're encouraging sales to do is to think before, especially for competitive deals, is to put your requests in early so we can get the best possible match for that individual on the use cases and at their maturity level. I think in Q2 there was something like 34, and then there was upwards of 60 in Q3. But now what we're trying to do, and I think a leading metric that I think would show that our social proof, our customer proof is working, is seeing those requests go down. And I say that because if the reference requests are going down, but win rates are still remaining the same or going up, to me, that seems like the actual proof points in the form of webinars and videos, case studies, is taking place of the reference requests, the need of them. There'll always be reference requests. But if that goes down and our win rates, close rates go up, I think that's going to be a prime example of that. So going back to the question, getting them more proactive with those reference requests has been a big savior for us. Another savior for us is working with an alpha product you've been helping us with with a Slack bot, which actually works through a bunch of our data to find what those matches are. If company A is looking to increase their NPS and scale their digital workflows, and we have a prospect that's trying to do the same thing, being able to match those two together, being able to find out who left a high NPS, who has good sentiment, understanding things like advocacy readiness, which Laudable calculates for us. Those are good signifiers of, is this the right person to match that individual with? So not only are we making the match, but it's an informed match, and then we're also scanning through customer proof to supplement all of that stuff. So it's just hyper relevant, and that's what everyone wants, is that hyper relevancy.
Yeah, so example with, of course, some of the names blocked out of sales asking for specific references on a competitive deal, and then getting ahead of what otherwise might be a reference request with the actual relevant proof, links, and people to connect them with. So you're basically saying you would expect reference requests to start going down because other proof points that sales is now able to provide, it is giving enough salient information to the prospect to reduce their need for connecting with humans in real time.
Yeah, that would be my hypothesis. I would love to see that happen. Operational efficiency would be great. If anything, the requests will remain the same and the win rate will increase with the more customer proof, and I could settle for that. Proactivity is, I think, the number one piece of this. So one thing I want to do with references, for example, is a proactive match. But so before they even ask for the reference, I want that reference to actually reach out to the customer or the prospect and say, hey, I know you're in a deal cycle with Gainsight. It sounds like our use cases are super similar. I've been with Gainsight for 2 or 3 years now. I love the product. We've been doing X, Y, and Z. Just here to help you guide your buying. And I think that shows true advocacy and the true impact of what a software and service can have on a company is when you're proactively reaching out. So that's one thing I would want to do to be a little bit more proactive. I think the more that we can do with verified outcomes, the better. So right now we have a different problem. We have too many proof points, and we're trying to figure out like how all of these things fit into customer proof, our go-to-market programs, our advocacy program in general. We're thinking of other ways to do things, like maybe it's a hot take type video where it's like a 2 to 3 minute video with a customer saying, this is why this strategy works, and this is why it works with Gainsight. And just have those be viral clips. I say viral like they're going to be viral. I don't know how viral they'll be, but they'll be
viral,
short clips.
Like cat memes on the internet.
Yeah, it'll never be as good as a cat
short
meme,
clips.
but will be more valuable than a cat meme. But yeah, just figuring out other ways we can leverage the customer to be an extension of our company. Customer proof is gold. And I think companies that will win in 2024 are the ones that will leverage their customers to sell on their behalf. And I truly believe that. Because in the short 4 months or so, we've been able to secure hundreds of G2 reviews. We've created so many different proof points. We have automation in certain areas I never thought we'd have. We have AI creating case studies, and we're seeing the impact of this type of stuff. People are reaching out about it internally and externally. People are seeing our reviews on G2. So if that can happen in 4 months with a scrappy team that was just strung together, it's incredible to see what will happen here. I was just talking earlier today with one of our heads of our advocacy team, and they're super excited for this recognition program because I think one of the key points here is to make sure that it's never one-sided with advocacy. If you keep asking and there's nothing in return, whether it's direct or indirect, direct meaning I'm going to send you something, I'll send you a bottle of wine, I'll do this, or indirect where it's up-leveling the personal brand, which I'm much more a fan of, those need to be crystal clear. And they need to be realized by the end user or the individual doing the reference or being the advocate. But if you can capitalize on that, I think that's where you get an army of people, of customers that just speak so much on your behalf that the selling motion becomes so much easier. So I think there's a lot of advocacy platforms and things that do gamification, but I don't really think there's a lot that do it well. So what we're doing is we're crafting a recognition program. And I don't call it an advocacy program for a reason. I think an advocacy program is an internal term, and I think a recognition program is an external term. So this recognition program will be able to assign points and things depending on the activities that customers do on our behalf. And I wanted to model it against an airline status. So maybe it's in-depth conversations quarterly about our roadmap where you can actually have Q&A. Maybe it's preferred pricing on specific products and services. We do a lot of events at Gainsight. So our marquee event is Pulse, having a VIP section, having an express lane when you check in, having front row seating for whatever you want to go, having a pre-Pulse dinner or something like that.
And how do you leverage Nick, who is like the CS celebrity?
Yeah, everyone wants time with Nick, right? Everyone wants a call with him. They want interaction with him. So what we're doing is trying to figure out how we can get like career coaching with Nick or something like that, or having him be the face of this program to make sure that it really sticks. Because socializing this program internally and making it stick is really what makes it effective, because everyone rallies behind it. So getting him on board with this and figuring out how he can be helpful. So whether it's quarterly or annual, kind of like QBR with Nick, or like we do these things called Pulse boardrooms, PBRs, we call them. And it's basically like you bring in all your executives together and you talk about customer success and the state of it, how it's going to affect multiple departments and things. So almost thinking about whether that's an event with some of our executive team that you can win and travel to. And so there's a bunch of different ways we're trying to think about leveraging our own executive team, especially Nick, in this program.
Lastly, what advice would you give to someone who is trying to champion similar programs at a company that maybe where you were about six months ago?
The first thing you have to do is document where your advocates are. So figure out what an advocate is and look for that pattern recognition. Look for that mirror. So at Gainsight, it was easy. Gainsight, they have verified outcomes. Verified outcomes is like our gold standard of, okay, this person's probably an advocate because they're getting value. So I would figure out I call them, as we work together, I always call them listening posts. What are the listening posts that you can have out there that say this person is probably an advocate? And some of them might be, this person has watched a number of webinars and they're a customer. This person's customer health score is positive. They left us a positive NPS on the relationship NPS or customer effort score, or they're one of our top users on community. Figure out what those listening posts are and listen. That's the easiest thing. Listen, get your list, but then once you get your list, then figure out what your escalation of commitment is. So I have my listening posts out there. I have this flow of potentials. Now let's convert. But how much do I want to convert? And that can be delicate. You don't want to throw the kitchen sink at them, but you don't want to aim too low. You might actually test it a little bit at first and figure out how much you can get away with. Get away with, it's a bad thing. How much they're willing to actually help you out with. So those are the things. Establish your listening posts, get your list, and figure out what your escalation of commitment is. And I think that's a really healthy start. And then once you figure out who those individuals are, interview them, get them on the phone, talk to them, figure out what helps them, what helps their personal brand. Is it having them on a webinar? Is it coaching sessions? Is it a mentorship thing? I think that's extremely valuable, and that's just such an easy way to give back to your customers.
Is there anything else that I didn't ask about that you want to make sure to cover?
One of the things I learned early on was to make sure that any program sticks is that you really need to vocalize the why behind it internally. So when we had a reorg, which I inherited this advocacy team, and I needed to tell the company why this matters. Like, it was something that has been abandoned in the past a little bit. There wasn't a ton of resources behind it, but I knew the value in it. And I really need to share cross-functionally with leadership, with CSMs, and everywhere in between why advocacy matters. Make sure that is clearly communicated, because advocacy touches so many different parts. Like I was saying before, it's market perception. It helps the individual and company brands, reference requests. It gives you competitive advantage, customer marketing. Those people give you feedback. Acquisition costs decrease when you have those references on hand. I needed to have that conversation before I could get buy-in company-wide. So that would be my initial piece of advice when you're trying to think of creating an advocacy program.
Smart. Sometimes that organizational change can be the hardest part of the
Usually
process.
is, but it's also the greatest part when people start believing, because then you have people in your back pocket that you can lean on when you're stuck.